I don't think there's a human being on the planet that hasn't suffered from shame to some degree. Some probably lighter than others.
It's part of the curse of the fall.
We'll get there too.
But
I know, but I just want to say that I think this is a relevant subject. Like we said in the hearing, God, is this for everyone? Yes. And in this series, is this for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
unfortunately
for everyone. And if you happen to, in some ways, have a lighter experience or version of this in your story, you're probably close to someone who has the heavier versions.
With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more.
Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Michael Thompson hanging out with my teammate, friend, SJ.
Compatriot.
Is that? Compadre. Yeah.
Compadre.
That's a good one.
Is that the...
Yeah, man, it's been, we're leaned into the new year. Not leaning, leaned in and have had really, I thought, a great time putting together this last series on hearing God, experiencing God in a relational way, and I really appreciate a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from listeners. That's been fun too, to address some things. And here we are, stepping in now to, January's over.
Yeah,
and
felt long.
Did it to you?
Yeah.
Man, I thought it was another one of those turned around, and January 2nd became January 32nd.
Yeah.
It's just like...
I don't know. It's kind of weird.
I know there's
like
not 32 days.
47th day of January right now for some reason.
Well,
it just
and
feels...
we, being on the road and
that can do it.
Having some gigs, having some opportunities to meet with hundreds of men in our backyard, as well as up down in Florida. Just really, really good to be with men, talking about orientation. And I think this next series is a little daring for us, and I think it has a chance to be one of your favorite words, and just a real invitation to some vulnerability. I would say, my background is counseling, biblical counseling. I think that both our backgrounds as counselees, as customers, this is a subject that we know a bit about. And then, working with and walking with men. I go back often, bro, to the King's Speech, and Lionel Logue, who was the speech therapist.
Yeah, I'm more like Lionel, by the way, just to interject.
Well, and I go back to that because we are. We don't have a ton of initials behind our names. We just have a lot of field experience. And yet, there are a lot of things we've learned along the way in our own stories, as well as helping men in their stories. And so
Anybody help these poor buggers? Yeah, man.
Yeah. Shell shock, right? From World War I.
Yeah.
And
such a great film.
And I think that's just I just want to bring that up to say there are definitely, and we'll quote some of them, there are definitely far better trained in some sense with this subject, but and yet we've got our journey. So we're going to share in this series now that we're stepping into about shame. And I think the title is From Shame to Freedom. And I was wrestling with Caleb about that a little bit. I said, it sounds like a destination. I don't know. And he's like, well, this is, we talked about it, and this is kind of where the title went. And I think it's from shame to more and more freedom, like this progression of
less
freedom.
shame, more freedom.
Less shame,
not to
more
make
freedom.
it like
there you
Miller
go.
Lite or whatever, but
that's a
great
good
taste, less filling. But I love the way you opened with that, talking about us and our experiences and our training that we've received. One of the feedback messages I got a call from our buddy Sean this morning, or I might have called him about something else, but he was telling me he loved the last episode of Hearing from God because it was just two guys talking about stuff they're passionate about. Mm. He really enjoyed listening to it.
Yeah. You know? And I think,
so it's very similar here. We're very passionate about it.
But they're different stories, right? As we were praying, as we got in, the stories we are kind of, moving into the darkness a bit, and what can hinder an image bearer from being, who they really are.
Right.
And so, we just want to unpack this idea of shame and also try to tell some stories of our experience and our encounters with it. So, lastly, I would say the other thing I do like about the title "From Shame to Freedom" is there's just a very evident contrast in that idea. Like it's this and this.
Yeah.
And so
shame keeps you captive, right?
Right.
And once you're not a captive anymore, what are you?
To be in prison,
free.
To be in prison by it, and to suffer less from it, is a journey, I think, to more and more freedom, being less encumbered and less affected and infected by this thing called shame. So we'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast in just a minute.
Heart of the Warrior encounter. The reason why I suggest it to men and try to get them to come to Heart of the Warrior is Heart of the Warrior is the only event I've ever been to in my life where you're amongst a bunch of men, yet you're alone with God. And it gives you time to completely unplug and really come to grips with where you are in your life and talk to God and figure out where you want to go. You will see transformation everywhere at the encounter. You will see people, this happen right before your eyes. And you'll come home energized, and you'll want your family, you'll want your friends, you'll want everybody you come in contact with to enjoy the same gift that you have from going to a Heart of the Warrior encounter.
Welcome back. I promised we'd be back.
Yeah, and here we are.
Here we are. Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. So, where would you like to start, bro? I know we've got a lot of things, and we're going to do this for some, I think, four more sessions. So
at least. Maybe we'll end up doing the same thing, kind of like here's an episode of all the things we couldn't get to. But I think a definition is a great place to start. Bring a little clarity.
Yeah.
What do we mean when we say shame? And there's several out there. I see a couple of things that you wrote down here, but I like this one that I found from Brené Brown. The intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection.
Yeah. So I hope Andy just can that needs to be written right, out a little bit in the lower thirds and the ticker because she's got a lot there. And I think in a headline of that, and I want you to read it again because I think it's a great definition, but it is this idea that not only have I done something wrong or something not right, there's something wrong, there's something not right with me. So it becomes an identity issue. It's like a weighted coat or apparel that has to, it's worn and it affects you And then to add to it, I think, like we said before, there's a toxicity to it. So then it not only affects you, but it starts to infect you and your self-worth and your self-talk, which we can get into some more in a little bit. Because and I don't think, in my opinion, strong opinion, I don't think there's a human being on the planet that hasn't suffered from shame to some degree. Some probably lighter than others.
It's part of the curse of the fall.
We'll get there too.
But
I know, but I just want to say that I think this is a relevant subject. Like we said in the hearing, God, is this for everyone? Yes. And in this series, is this for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
unfortunately
for everyone. And if you happen to, in some ways, have a lighter experience or version of this in your story, you're probably close to someone who has the heavier versions. And so I think it's very, very powerful. It's a powerful thing, and it's affecting and infecting a lot of people. So if you could just read that one more time, and then I want to talk about a couple pieces, a couple phrases in that before we launch on.
So shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
Something's wrong with me.
Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection.
Yeah. So you're made for intimacy, and you're made for connection. You're made for relationship, and this is just a curse of a kind that tells you you're not.
Yeah,
you're not. You're not worth intimacy and connection and relationships.
When the Trinity DNA within us tells us otherwise, right? So if I were the enemy, which we say a lot of times, if I were the enemy, I would want to cut that connection of intimacy to God and to others, because what we talk about is everything that we talk about is rooted in the connection to God, the intimacy to God, and the intimacy with others. And if you can cut that connection, then you're isolated. You're in a place of self-judgment, self-talk, like you talked about. As I read this the first time I found it, it occurred to me, she's talking about that we are unworthy of love and belonging. All the ingredients of love that we talked about. Belonging, significance, worth, validation, initiation, worth.
Yeah.
Right? So shame comes directly against all those ingredients of love. Chucks them. These are all supposed to go into this intimacy stew that we're made for. All of those ingredients just gets chucked out, and instead, what you're given is a poison of unworthiness, unlove, insignificance. Right? All of these ingredients are tainted by the enemy to promote a lack of intimacy and unworthy connection.
We've said this too, that if there's something that's corruptible, it means there's something that was original. And so as you're saying, I'm just saying something similar to what you are in another way, that we're made for love, by love, and so shame, as we'll look at, is really this powerful influence, this powerful and subtle declaration that has a way of making the very thing that we're for unavailable. And the pain, I like what Brené Brown said at the beginning of that. This is the pain of it. This goes into grief and sorrow, regret can be involved. It doesn't just survive on its own, shame. It has a support system of its own. And,
I'm sure.
And the thing that makes it so powerful, and again, I contrast this with our conversation about relational intimacy with God and hearing his voice and stuff. It shuts relationship down.
Yes.
And it can shut it down in so many ways, even to the point of, all right, I'll do whatever I have to do to make that connection work.
Mm-hmm.
And so when
sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice.
So long before God even gets before he gets in the conversation with us as boys and girls, shame has had a day, if not several days, and then start to scratch the record, if you will, in our hearts and souls again and again, so that it just is somehow in the backdrop of our lives until it comes and is very, very relevant again. So it's as we define it and try to describe it, it's almost like the green gas. I
like infection.
Infection.
Because it's operating inside us. You can't really, it's not like you decide necessarily to put it on every morning.
No.
At some point, it's just in you until it isn't.
Yeah.
I love what right in the beginning of King Me in the introduction, dude, exactly to your point. The chance that we were captured in our youth and held captive on the enemy's side of the board is 100%. That's how our adversary gets a head start, by using other kings to usher guilt, shame, and fear into a boy's story, take hold of his heart, and compromise his ability to reign in his own sphere of influence when his turn comes as a man. So the shame comes on us, right? And there's another quote I shared at the DFG events, where you talk about how the enemy uses and propagates.
Mm-hmm.
So these shameful moments that we experience, the feelings and the experiences that Brené Brown talked about, the enemy takes them and uses them against us, holds us captive, right? Keeps that infection moving in our lives. It's always kind of operating there in the background, consciously or subconsciously. And then he propagates it, which is, because Sherry's a gardener, I know what that word really means in that context, and I think that's the context you were meaning it in, was to take a piece of a plant that's growing and make another plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
For good,
right? If I have a potato plant that's doing really well, I want 2 potato plants because I'm going to get more potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why that one came up with me. But the enemy does the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you are living under the tree of shame, guilt, embarrassment, judgment, rejection, isolation, well, he wants to make that an orchard.
Right.
And he'll propagate those things in your heart. Yeah.
Propagation. Man. Yeah. Thanks for bringing up those couple sentences. I think that, it's 100% injury rate again.
Mm-hmm.
It's casualties, shame. It does have a way of slithering in, because I think we talk about the enemy on this show literally.
Yeah.
And yet, if that's not your cup of tea, maybe you look at this as figuratively. And yet I think you still come to the same outcomes, meaning.
Yeah, whether it's allegorically or not. I mean, it's, if you think there was a literal garden and a literal serpent, or
yes, that this
it's just a story.
That this thing, this creature, this thing, this, as Brené says, the feelings associated with this, the emotion that's involved. I mean, so again, there's got to be something that's the way we're constructed and built that can be corrupted.
Right. That
when it doesn't go well. And this also relies, I'm going back to our boyhood and girlhood. So 6, 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old us, that you can go back in the story, which we have an assignment to do some of that about shame. And, these are experiences that have happened, and not all of them were, for all of us, were interpreted accurately, but they were interpreted nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So when we saw this extraordinary video, I'm trying to remember who brought it to us. And it was hard to watch after you really realized 45 seconds what was going on. It was a mother with an infant in the chair, and she was giving that infant attunement and contact and visual and things that we need. And this is an infant. I mean, this baby maybe it was a year old, but
this is Tommy brought this to us.
Okay, remember?
Yeah, Tom.
And so, and then
it was even shame. It might have been Shamefaced or something was the title of it.
The experiment was, and I feel like, don't do that to this kid.
Oh my gosh,
okay? But
it was torture to watch.
So, but we're watching this video. The experiment in this controlled environment was, now, Mom, I want you to turn away from.
And just keep your face.
Deadpan. That was it.
She was smiling and
it was deadpan.
Engaged, and then she just.
Yes. And the baby is starting to interpret the mother now in ways that are uncomfortable for the baby. Like, what happened? And it goes through these couple steps. Like, okay, let me do the things that normally make you respond in kind.
Yeah, engage.
Yes. Maybe we'll put this. We got to put this link on the.
Yeah, we'll find it.
And then the baby gets concerned and starts to, pine for.
Yeah, grasp at.
Like, come on, Mom.
Right.
Really,
Where's
come on.
my mom? Who is this person?
What's wrong?
What did I do?
And then the baby starts to move into this other field of stress, unhappiness.
Even despair.
Yes.
Yeah.
My point in bringing all that up, SJ, is it's a situation in time. It's moment. And this is a controlled experiment. Now, when the mom finally comes back, things are restored. But again, that baby does not know really fully what's going on. Okay, well, of course, when you're 6, you're way better at this. No, you're not.
When you're 26.
Well, you're way better at this. No. These things that are formative, if the mother had not the baby doesn't know what's going on, and yet the interpretation is, what did I do? What didn't I do? What can I do? And if that is not resolved, what did I do? It moves into this place of shame. And I want you to read Brené one more time.
Yeah.
Of something's wrong, and it graduates to something's wrong with me. I'm not enough.
Yeah.
I'm too much.
Yeah.
I don't know how
this.
to keep this person happy. We start seeing codependency. We start seeing all kinds of systems get hijacked in a way that love's conditional, and I somehow need, and this lends itself into the false self. I'm bringing up the shame thing now to say, oh man, this can do a real number on a soul, on a heart, on a little guy, on a little girl, in terms of they don't have the categories, to even begin to qualify a mom ignoring, or a dad, because dads share this one, being very, very angry. They don't know that we're angry that you got hurt on our watch. They know you're angry. Of course, they're going to interpret at me.
Of course. Because of me.
Because of me.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up that video too, because it's so important to recognize that so much of this is happening in our conscious memory. We can remember things that we're ashamed about, or things that we said, or things that we did. But much of this happens and is kind of birthed in this realm of 6 months, 8 months, 12 months old, things that happen
2,
to
3,
us.
4,
I know
and
your
5.
story,
Yeah.
And mine too, where these things happen to us.
Yeah.
And they brought shame. So I think there's maybe a misconception that shame is always about something I did or that's wrong with me.
Yeah.
To our point that we've been trying to make. But I think there's just as often it's put on us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what the hell were you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
I never would have done that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, that is put on you in a way that just latches onto you, man.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
there's something wrong with you. I mean, I remember that. I have a memory of that being said, maybe not in those exact words, but the old one, and I'm sure I said this to my son, I'm not really angry. I'm just disappointed, which we chuckle at because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's I'm ashamed of you. I'm disappointed in you. So back to Brené, intensely painful feeling or experience of believing. That's a key point right there.
Yeah.
What you believe matters, right?
Yeah.
The experience and what we're saying is these things are put on us, and it's not like, well, here's a choice and here's a choice, and I'm going to choose to believe that one. Sometimes that's what it is, but early on, it's a belief system that's put on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
a response system.
Yeah. Yeah.
A perspective, all of that stuff, SJ. I mean, it's just very, it's hard to go into it deeply. I think Brené Brown is as good as, anybody to bring an expert.
One of the best ones I could find.
To bring an expert into who has studied this in human beings for decades now and has brought her findings back. I mean, I really like Jay Stringer, yes. Really like Jay Stringer and his book Unwanted, and he says it is attempting to react the formative stories of trauma, abuse, and shame that convinced us we were unwanted to begin with. So you talk about the healing process, the journey to freedom, right? The journey to freedom. Mm-hmm. It's attempting and going through what is it that's in the way. What does it look like to go back and attempt to reenact the formative stories of trauma, abuse, and shame that convinced us we were unwanted to begin with, right? Disordered intimacy, he calls it. Instead, we are bonded to feelings of shame and judgment. So if there's no advocate there, what Jay's talking about, if there's nobody to help you even in that moment bring healing, you're going to have to go back into those moments and get healing for those moments.
Absolutely.
Get absolutely. Somebody, like our friend Nita has taught us, that there's a talking day.
Right.
When that little guy does not know how to understand and interpret, of course, I can't tell you how many men, 3 handfuls probably at least, men who believed when their dad left, when their mom and dad got divorced, what did they do wrong?
Yep.
Why is this happening? Could I, should I, would I have done something differently? And it really doesn't have anything to do with them, but that's how they immediately respond is, what is my part in this? Mm-hmm. What did I do to cause this? Mm-hmm. And if I had, or if I hadn't, cleaned my room more, done more chores,
been more disciplined. I mean,
it's a very, very broken record. And those are just, I think in attempts to defining shame, we're actually, I think, gravitated into the experiences of shame. Trying to help
because it is an experience. It's a feeling and an experience, both. Yeah. So I'm thinking of two different clips that we use at the weekends. First being Martian Child, great movie. It's a story about a little boy that's abandoned, and he's created his own narrative to try to cope with the abandonment that he's experienced, the shame of it.
And so he takes on the identity of a Martian from another planet.
I must be from a different planet.
Yeah.
There must be something different about me, which is pretty close to there must be something wrong with me. But towards the end, not to spoiler alert, the movie's been out for 20 years, but he says in the finally when the David breaks through to Dennis says,
yeah,
why did they leave me? Why didn't they want me? And the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air clip, and this is after, so Dennis is probably 8?
Yeah.
In the movie?
Yeah, easy.
He's made a lot of vows and agreements, although he couldn't articulate them. Will Smith, when his dad leaves him yet again,
in the Fresh
is
Prince,
17 in the Fresh Prince,
Bel-Air,
he rattles off all the vows and agreements. I'll never be like him. I never needed him anyway. But even with that, he still comes to the place of, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't he want me?
Yeah.
Even with all the pain associated since he's 5 years old, 12 years of it in Fresh Prince's case.
The only
that shame of what's wrong with me comes up and out of us.
The only one I would add to just put a little more icing on that is Good Will Hunting.
Oh, yeah.
It is the scene where shame and Will Hunting's story, with Robin Williams playing the counselor Sean, that is the scene, man, the culmination of their counseling journey and detachment disorders and the things that Will Hunting is suffering from, and how the strategies that he's come up with to protect himself.
Right.
So this is a whole other
how he's acting out,
other element of shame.
Yeah.
In what it invites us or requires us to do, in order, and it's wild, man. It's really crazy. It's actually something that you do to actually reinforce it. So now it's not just something that was done to you. You are participating now in the upkeep of shame, which I know we're going to talk some more about, but I had to throw that in there. Like, how the crap does that work?
Oh, yeah. Well, and what it makes me think of, Michael, and I have not done any research. This just came to me right now. But you see many, many times, let's just go with this. Boys who are physically abused end up being physical abusers.
I mean, that's the data. Yeah.
That's it. So how is that connected to this issue of shame? I wonder.
Oh, I think
how it is.
I think if you were, to not make light of it, but if your parents were Duke fans, you're gonna be a Duke fan. If they were Patriot fans or Golden State Warrior fans, there's something inherited in some of those spaces. If your mom and dad, experienced a very punitive home, or a shamed way of parenting, even though they would say, I'll never do that.
Right. That was terrible.
It is ridiculous how many of those patterns get repeated.
Yeah.
In the heat of moments. I mean, and it makes sense. It's in there.
Yeah, it lends credibility to the idea that it's subconscious.
Now you're the dad. You're not the kid.
Yeah.
But your tapes of experiencing all that you experienced that was shameful just play.
Just play on autopilot.
Almost a vomiting. It just comes out. So very, very, very tricky. I think of the other examples of shame. I wrote down the Scarlet Letter. I
had to read that book in the 8th grade.
Oh, it's startling.
It's startling.
Shouldn't probably be allowed till you were 18,
at least,
not 12, 13.
A junior or whatever, but golly, dude.
But in back in biblical times, I mean, the law shamed the crap out of people.
Oh yeah.
From unclean and lepers, and there's just a very, very heavy punitive, not vibe, reality around all of that. And so when there is condemnation and guilt and a punitive system, you are going to see shame.
Yeah.
Even though, prisoners and imprisonment unlawfully. I think of that reality of it just you got to find some kind of explanation, some kind of answers to why is this happening? Why did this happen to me? When it wasn't something that you've done, but rather, like you said earlier, something that was done to you.
Oh man, now I'm thinking about Jean Valjean.
I know. Yeah,
right? Steals a loaf of bread to survive, spends 19 years in prison, and then he's still not free because he's got this yellow passport.
Yeah.
That means he was a prisoner. He was a convict.
And he's haunted by the way he was treated,
right?
In prison.
Right.
The Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh my gosh.
We can go on and on and on.
Okay.
Bagger Vance.
Yeah.
And
the
shame that he feels surviving World War I. Yes, all of these things, they're in all these stories because they're so prevalent in our story. And I think it's just very important to, get our try to get our arms around the weightiness and significance. And I still even feel like we're scratching the surface. And yet I think there's so much more to talk about. So.
Absolutely. So let me go before we got to start landing the plane. Let's talk about how shame works. And I found this list again from Brené in her book Daring Greatly. Just really quickly, shame is a focus on the self, while guilt is a focus on behavior, right? Shame is highly correlated with addiction, depression, eating disorders, violence, bullying, and aggression. So it's a motivator for unhealthy behavior. Shame thrives in environments where it is kept secret and silenced.
Yeah.
Ooh, two more. And then I'd love to hear what you think. Shame can be caused by conflicting expectations about who we should be, right? And shame can be lessened by removing or reducing separation from others.
Yeah.
And that's not just physical presence, right? That's,
yeah. Emotional, even spiritual, which I don't bring along as a tag along. I'm saying even, spiritual. So
you had a response where you went, to shame thrives in environments where it's kept secret and silenced.
Yeah.
What was that came up in you?
Well, I think two things, not to go too scholarly biblically, but I think you have to, you look at the scriptures, and there's a lot of references to shame in the scriptures. And a lot of them, I told you this, 160 or so, 2/3 of them are in the Old Testament. So it's very interesting. And yet, which is a very punitive system under the Old Covenant. So when love wins and comes into the New Covenant, it doesn't mean shame goes away.
Right.
It means it's treated differently. It's almost encouraged in the Old Testament.
Right.
As some attribute of following God. And yet we see in the New Testament it's not. Galatians 5, we look at the fruit of the Spirit and the fruit of the flesh. I mean, but I think even before the fruit of the flesh, there's the seeds of the fruit of the flesh. And that's where shame, I think, really, really does a number. I think Genesis 2:25, I mean, in creation, I think the principle is very clear. And I'm more of a literalist, but if you just want the analogy of the garden, they were naked and unashamed. You can't be any more vulnerable than naked.
Right. And it didn't even occur to them that being naked was a problem.
Right.
Something they should have to cover up or any of that. There was not even a whiff of that.
So back to what you're talking about with her definition and the hiding, and the isolation, which is very much the opposite of what we were talking about earlier, connection and relationship, the number that shame does. And so you just you flip the page and you're in Genesis 3, 8 and 9, and it's after the encounter with Satan and after the trick that he played, and they bite the apple or they take the fall, or they do the thing that has them move from, trusting God to, being, in this condition now where they say
with God, without God.
For now,
yeah,
God enters the story in Genesis 3, 8, and 9, and where are you? He doesn't not know where they are. It's more cosmic than that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh goodness, where do you know where you are is probably a better translation of that idea, that sentiment. Not where are you? It's
right.
Oh my gosh, do you know?
Do you know what's happened?
Yes, where you are, what's happened, and then we go from naked and unashamed and unafraid, and I think they have a cohort in that space. Fear and shame and fear have a relationship to I'm naked and so I hid. I'm ashamed.
Covered up.
Covered up, yes, all of that. So I think that's what I went. With in regards to the phrase there is, yes, it has an effect on the soul in ways that we cover up. We either try or become convinced that we need to try a way. I need to perform or do something to get what I'm not getting, or which is one way, or probably 2/3 of the time, we just retreat into the safest place we can, because if you knew what I did and what I am, you would run.
Yeah, you would isolate you would cut the connection between us, which is what shame does anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the irony of it, is like, in order to protect ourselves from being cut off from someone who would judge us for what we did, we cut ourselves off from the person.
Mm-hmm, well, and of course, we've found that we've learned through experience it's not safe. I can't trust. You will reinforce these things, and usually that happens. Even that, the attitude and perspective and belief of that, SJ, happens because it happened.
Right.
It just doesn't take many of these swings to really rivet this voice, the smell of it, and I'm trying to give it very tangible things. Shame has an effect. You said infection, meaning fever, sweats, chills. I mean, that's what we think of with an infection. Yeah. So as we wrap it up in just some definition, that it has a smell, it has a bitter taste, it has a sound, it has accusational, condemnational, and it's back where we're hearing from God, hearing God. I mean, there's thought patterns that form. There's a practice to listening to God's voice. Well, crap, there's been a practice in listening to this voice.
Right. Shame,
fear, and guilt too, but it just is a very, very demoralizing and a very imprisoning emotion. I would go as far as even there's a spirit of it. There's
more than that in the next
more
episode.
Than just an attitude or something, but actually there's to the biblical idea. I think there's foul spirits who just this is what they are in charge of.
That's the uniform they wear.
This is what they are up to, and trying to establish a stronghold. If shame is the biggest thing that keeps people from relationship and intimacy and even working through their history in order to get free, then there's Bob the builder, the maintenance guy, whose job is to make sure
Beelzebub, the builder.
The screws are tight. The screws are tight, and things are in place.
Oh my gosh, man! Yeah. Let's talk more about the two realms, two kingdoms, and as we've mentioned, we've talked at length before. But what does this look like?
Yeah.
In the spiritual realm in our next episode, and maybe we can get into some of those tools that they use. But
I think lastly, I would say in the forecast, what's so cool is how Jesus comes to dispel that, and we see that in the Gospels. We see who he hangs with. We see we refer to the chosen a lot. I mean, we see how he handles people who were told there's something wrong with you. That's why you are suffering
and suffering
and Jesus
penalized.
I think it's a brilliant point of the gospel, not to be overlooked, that so many of these people were ashamed. Yeah. So when...
And they killed him in the most shameful way known to man at that time.
Right.
Crucifixion was. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's not. I don't want to touch and go and take off again.
So I think as we go into more of the remedy, what is the remedy for this? How is there an antidote? Is there a way to get free? Well, first we're talking like we're not doctors, but we're talking like, here's what you have. Here's how it's infecting. Here's the symptoms of it. And we could talk so much more about the symptoms, and we will even about some of the symptoms that we felt and that we couldn't not feel.
We're not doctors, but we remember our experience on the
journey
as a patient.
As patients, yes.
Yeah. And we were conscious for the surgery.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So, man, if this was something you could take a couple gummies for and be right as rain, but I think you have to have, I think, a good diagnosis and a good understanding of this in order then to move from it and to get the kind of treatment that I hope we can help encourage, because we've experienced some God treatment that has freed us from the voices of shame and the weightiness of shame. So that's enough for now. Thank you for joining us for our opening session on shame and moving from shame to more and more fear and freedom. We'll be talking more about, I hope, some good news in this from this diagnosis, but I also want to honor the reality that this is a big subject, and there are a lot of helpful places to go, and there's some unhelpful places to go. Be careful. If you need any help, you want any recommendations for counselors, you want any encouragement. You said something to me about King Me as you brought it in. I did a word
study on King Me. You talk about it 67 different times in the book.
Yeah. And
it's brought up.
And I think with the developmental stages that we're in, what does shame look like when you experience it when you're young, and what does shame look like when it has hold of you?
How does it get propagated?
Yes, all of that.
How does it get
expounded upon? There's a fair amount of that. So I'm not saying reading a book is going to help fix this, but reading a book could help you understand this more deeply, so that maybe you could pursue also more deeply some help and encouragement.
Maybe share in the comments if you want to some of your experiences or your understanding, something that we shared that maybe stood out to you. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more. and you were made for more.